Right. So coming to the next one, general auditing principles and auditor's responsibility as per the study material of the ICAI. If you come to the second chapter over there, yes, that's the case study MCQ which we are discussing right now. Biswajit is conducting the audit of Have More Limited. He is the auditor of the company since last 3 years and has found nothing unusual in the operations and the financial statements of the company. Company has many locations where substantial inventories are stored and lying. During his fourth year stint, he finds that inventory quantities have risen disproportionately as compared to the past few year trends. He has assessed the existence of RMM due to fraud. The company has revenue of 750 crore during the year. He has deeply verified all aspects relating to revenue recognition of the company and has concluded that there is no RMM due to fraud related to RR, revenue recognition. During the course of audit, it has come to his knowledge that the company is also required to install an online air pollution control monitoring system in its plant as mandated in the state pollution control law. Right? In the state pollution control, yes, law, legislation and the regulations. Non-installation of such online air pollution control monitoring systems may lead to fines and even the sealing of the plant. While verifying the payroll data of the company, it has come to the notice that provisions of law preventing employment of child labor are not being adhered to as the company is employing the child labor in the flagrant violation of the rules in this regard. The company also exports part of its turnover. Matter has got unnoticed in compliance audit carried out by the agencies of the overseas buyers. Okay. Right, so we see one part of the question is regarding the SA 240 and second part is regarding the SA 250. Yes, the auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in an audit of the financial statements. And second one, SA 250, consideration of laws and regulations in an audit of the financial statements. Based on the above, answer the question. Considering the description of the disproportionate rise in the inventory quantity. Right, so again, yeah, the first part of the question, company has many locations where substantial inventory was stored and lying. Right, inventory quantities have risen disproportionately as compared to the past year. So auditor needs to attend the physical verification count being conducted by the management at the year-end date unless impracticable. Considering the description of the disproportionate rise in the inventory quantity, which of the following is not appropriate response to the assessed RMM due to fraud? Not likely to be an appropriate response. Observe the inventory counting at all the locations at the same time by employing the necessary resources. Observe inventory count at certain locations after prior intimation, so no surprise being given. More rigorous examination of the packed item during observing the inventory count process, because there might be the empty boxes. Observing the inventory count at the end of the reporting period to minimize the risk of the manipulation. So more rigorous examination at the end of the reporting period, all locations to be covered. Yes, yes, yes. Observing inventory count at certain locations and that too with prior intimation. Right, what does it say? Not likely to be an appropriate response for the RMM due to fraud. Then it has been concluded by the auditor that there is no RMM due to fraud related to RR. Which of the following statements is most appropriate? Auditor needs to document the reason for arriving at the conclusion that there is no RMM due to fraud related to RR. Identified and assessed RMM due to fraud needs to be documented. Since no RMM due to fraud pertaining to RR was identified, separate documentation is not needed. Auditor needs only to document that no RMM due to fraud relating to revenue recognition was identified. So only document that there is no RMM, no need to document the reason. Auditor needs to give reference to the discussion among the engagement team members to document that no RMM due to fraud relating to revenue recognition was identified. No. So it says just document that there is no RMM, document the discussion, or say that it's not required only. Or the auditor needs to document the reasons for arriving at the conclusion that there is no RMM due to fraud related to revenue recognition. Because as per SA 240, you have to go by the presumed assumption that revenue recognition will always to be considered as a fraud risk. But in case if you are rebutting, there is also a case study in the theory part of the paper. So that for rebutting that there is no risk of fraud in the revenue recognition, the auditor needs to keep the documentation for the same in the audit file. And the documentation obviously also needs to include the reason. Okay. Which of the following statement was most appropriately describe responsibilities of auditor in relation to compliance with the state pollution control legislation and regulation? Right. So now state pollution control legislation and the regulation. So now they are talking about the SA 250 consideration of laws and regulation. Sufficient appropriate evidence needs to be obtained by the auditor. Physical verification of the workability of the system is to be checked by auditor. Only inquiry of management and correspondence, inspection of correspondence with the regulatory authority will suffice. Only physical verification of the system and review of correspondence with the regulatory authority. Right. So physical verification, no. Sufficient appropriate evidence, no. Why? Because this is the other laws and regulation. Oh yes, as per SA 250, laws and regulations divided under two. One, laws and regulations which have a direct effect, like the Provident Fund or the Income Tax Act, for which you need to obtain the SAAE. But for other laws and regulations, you have to perform the specified audit procedures. And what are the specified audit procedures? Inquiry of the management and the inspection of the correspondence with the regulatory authority. Right. So one, inquiries of the management, and second, inspection of the correspondence with the regulatory authority. Right. So that is why C is the option. The auditor has observed non-compliance of law prohibiting employment of child labor, which is the most appropriate course of action for him to proceed in this matter. He should obtain the further information to evaluate the possible effect. He must report the matter to the concerned government department. He should obtain the further information to evaluate the possible effect. Besides, we should also evaluate the implications of the non-compliance for the audit risk assessment. He should express a modified opinion. No. So he should obtain the further information and also check the implications of the non-compliance on the audit risk assessment. Okay. Next one. Which of the following statements is most appropriate about the documentation of non-compliance with law regulation by an auditor in the context of the SA 250? Identified non-compliance, suspected non-compliance, non-compliance which has been finally determined by the court of law, or instance of identified as well as suspected non-compliance needs to be documented. Obviously, both. Identified as well as the suspected non-compliance needs to be documented. Okay.